There is a strange kind of loneliness that almost nobody talks about. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, not the loneliness of having nobody around, but the loneliness of constantly giving your energy to people and slowly realizing they barely see you. You answer messages immediately. You stay calm when others become disrespectful. You avoid conflict. You try to understand everyone. You forgive too quickly. You carry conversations. You become emotionally available for people who would disappear the second your usefulness fades. And one day, without warning, something inside you begins to crack. That is what makes it dangerous. There is no announcement, no warning, no dramatic betrayal. Just a slow shift in energy. People interrupt you more. They stop taking your words seriously. They become comfortable disappointing you. They expect your forgiveness before they even apologize. And the strange part is, the nicer you become, the more invisible you feel. You listen. You understand. You sacrifice. You avoid conflict. You become emotionally available to everyone around you. Yet somehow, you feel less valued than the people who give less attention, less kindness, less effort. You begin to wonder if something is wrong with the world. But the truth is darker than that. Human beings are not naturally drawn toward what is endlessly available. They are drawn toward what feels grounded, defined, self-respecting. And when kindness comes without boundaries, people stop seeing it as kindness. They see it as weakness. Not consciously, not always maliciously, but psychologically, because deep down people measure value differently than they admit. A man who constantly abandons himself to keep others comfortable slowly disappears in front of them, and most never even notice it happening. There is a certain sadness in being the person everyone depends on but nobody truly sees. The friend who is always there, the son who never complains, the boyfriend who keeps understanding, the employee who says yes to everything, the man who absorbs pressure silently because he believes being needed is the same thing as being respected. But they are not the same. Sometimes the most invisible people in the room are the ones trying the hardest to be loved. And maybe you already know this feeling. You answer quickly. You over-explain. You try not to disappoint anyone. You swallow irritation because you want peace. You give people the benefit of the doubt long after they have proven they do not deserve it. You become emotionally flexible for everyone except yourself. And, slowly, you lose shape. Carl Jung once said that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. But many people never become themselves. They become what keeps them accepted. That is the real tragedy of excessive niceness. It does not just change how others treat you. It changes your identity. At first, being nice feels noble. You feel mature for staying calm. You feel strong for staying patient. You feel morally superior for always being understanding. And sometimes, you are. But over time, another emotion quietly enters the picture. Resentment. Not loud resentment, not explosive anger. Silent resentment. The kind that grows in exhausted people who keep giving what nobody returns. The kind hidden behind forced smiles and "it's okay" responses. You start feeling emotionally tired around people you once cared about. Not because you hate them, but because somewhere deep inside, your mind realizes something your mouth refuses to say. You are abandoning yourself. Again, and again, and again. There is a reason emotionally exhausted people often struggle to explain why they are unhappy. Because nothing dramatic happened, no catastrophe, no obvious abuse. Just thousands of small moments where they betrayed their own feelings to maintain approval, and eventually the soul notices. Nietzsche once wrote that the most common form of human stupidity is forgetting what one is trying to do. Many people think they are trying to be good, but what they are really trying to do is avoid rejection. That changes everything, because genuine kindness comes from strength. People-pleasing comes from fear, and the two can look identical on the surface. A man cancels his own plans because his friend needs help. That can be compassion, or it can be terror of disappointing someone. A man avoids arguments with his partner. That can be emotional maturity, or it can be fear of abandonment. A man remains endlessly patient with disrespect. That can be wisdom, or it can be low self-worth disguised as virtue. The human mind is incredibly skilled at turning fear into morality. That is why so many nice people secretly feel empty. They spend years convincing themselves they are peaceful when they are actually afraid. Afraid of conflict, afraid of being disliked, afraid of becoming selfish, afraid of losing connection. So they become softer and softer until they no longer recognize themselves. And ironically, the more they suppress themselves to keep relationships alive, the less alive those relationships become, because authenticity disappears. People can feel it, even if they cannot explain it. There is something psychologically unsettling about a person who never expresses anger, never says no, never pushes back, never disappoints anyone. It feels unnatural because human beings instinctively trust people who have edges, not cruelty, not aggression. Edges, boundaries, standards, self-respect. A man who never protects his own emotional space eventually teaches others not to protect it either. That is one of the cruelest truths about human behavior. People often treat you according to the standards you silently accept, not the standards you wish they respected. And excessive niceness quietly lowers those standards every day. You answer calls at midnight when you are exhausted. You tolerate disrespectful jokes because you do not want tension. You forgive too quickly because silence makes you anxious. You apologize for things that are not your fault because harmony feels safer than honesty. And eventually people stop asking themselves, is this fair to him? Because your behavior already answered the question. There is a moment many men experience but rarely talk about. A moment where they realize they have become emotionally useful, but not emotionally valued. People come to them for comfort, for favors, for stability, for support, but almost nobody asks what they need. Almost nobody notices when they are struggling, because somewhere along the way, they became a role instead of a person. The reliable one, the calm one, the understanding one, and roles do not receive empathy. They provide it. That is why some of the kindest people carry the deepest loneliness. Nobody looks closely at someone who never complains. Schopenhauer believed that human relationships are often driven less by love and more by need. And while that sounds cynical, there is uncomfortable truth inside it. Many people are attached not to who you are, but to how you make them feel safe, validated, understood, comfortable. The moment your boundaries interrupt that comfort, their perception of you changes, not because you became cruel, but because they were more attached to your compliance than your humanity. And that realization can be devastating, especially for people who built their identity around being good, because they expect goodness to guarantee appreciation. But the world does not work that way. The world often rewards emotional clarity more than emotional sacrifice. Think about the people who command respect naturally. They are not always the loudest, not always the coldest, not always the most dominant, but they have presence. And presence comes from congruence. Their words align with their boundaries. Their emotions align with their actions. Their kindness does not require self-erasure. You know where they stand. That creates psychological weight. Meanwhile, excessively nice people often become emotionally transparent in the worst way. Everyone knows they will tolerate more, forgive faster, stay longer, accept less. Predictability without boundaries destroys tension, and without tension, people stop paying attention. This is not just true in relationships. It happens everywhere, at work, in friendships, in families. The employee who always says yes becomes invisible. The friend who is always available becomes replaceable. The man who constantly sacrifices himself becomes emotionally overlooked. Not because people are evil, but because humans unconsciously adapt to what becomes normal, and nothing becomes more invisible than endless accommodation. There is also another darker reality hidden underneath excessive niceness. Many nice people secretly believe their value must be earned, not through achievement, not through authenticity, but through emotional service. They believe love is conditional, so they become useful. They become emotionally intelligent too early in life. They learn how to read moods, how to avoid tension, how to calm angry people, how to anticipate emotional shifts, often because they grew up in unstable emotional environments. A child raised around unpredictable anger quickly learns survival through emotional adaptation. They become agreeable, careful, hyper-aware, not because it is their personality, because it kept them safe. And years later, that survival strategy becomes identity. They enter adulthood believing their role is to maintain emotional peace at any cost. But there is a hidden consequence to constantly managing everyone else's emotions. You lose contact with your own. You stop asking, what do I actually feel? What do I want? What do I need? Because your attention is permanently directed outward, toward reactions, toward approval, toward emotional danger. That is why many excessively nice people struggle with emptiness. Their identity was built around external harmony instead of internal truth. And eventually the mind begins rebelling, not dramatically, quietly. You feel irritation over small things. You become emotionally numb. You feel disconnected during conversations. You fantasize about disappearing, starting over, leaving everyone behind. Not because you are evil, because your psyche is exhausted from suppression. Jung believed that whatever is rejected from consciousness does not disappear. It returns in darker forms. That includes anger, especially anger. Many people fear anger because they associate it with destruction, but healthy anger is not destruction. Healthy anger is information. It tells you when something matters, when a line has been crossed, when your dignity is being compromised. A man incapable of anger is not peaceful. He is disconnected. Real peace requires the ability to confront. Otherwise, it is merely helplessness wearing spiritual language. And this is where many nice people become trapped. They think setting boundaries will transform them into bad people. So they continue sacrificing themselves while secretly envying those who do not. They watch emotionally unavailable people receive more respect, more attention, more desire, and they become confused. Because they were taught kindness should automatically attract love. But attraction is deeply psychological. People are drawn toward emotional certainty, toward grounded identity, toward self-possession, not endless emotional availability. The tragedy is that excessively nice people often make themselves too psychologically easy to consume. No mystery, no challenge, no emotional risk. Everything is given immediately. Time, attention, forgiveness, energy. And human beings rarely treasure what arrives without resistance. Not because humans are cruel, because value is often connected to emotional investment. What costs nothing emotionally is often experienced as having little weight. There is a scene that repeats itself quietly across millions of lives. A man sits in a car after helping everyone all day. His phone is silent. Nobody checked on him. Nobody asked how he was doing. Nobody noticed he was falling apart. And for the first time in a long time, he feels something dangerous. Not sadness, disappearance. As if his entire existence has become functional instead of meaningful. That feeling changes people. Some become bitter. Some become cold. Some withdraw completely. Others finally awaken. Because eventually a painful realization emerges. If you never reveal where you end, people will never know where to stop. And boundaries are not cruelty. They are clarity. The inability to say no is not kindness. It is self-abandonment. There is a reason Stoic philosophy emphasized inner sovereignty so heavily. The Stoics understood something modern culture often forgets. A person who cannot tolerate disapproval becomes psychologically enslaved. Because their behavior no longer belongs to them. It belongs to other people's reactions. That is why excessive niceness creates invisibility. Your entire personality becomes reaction-based. You shapeshift according to what others want. You soften truths to avoid tension. You suppress instincts to maintain acceptance. And slowly, people stop seeing a real human being. They see accommodation. There is no weight to accommodation, no gravity, no identity, only adaptation. And adaptation without selfhood becomes emotional erasure. You can observe this dynamic clearly in relationships. The partner who constantly overgives often feels strangely unseen. At first, they are appreciated, but later they become expected, then eventually taken for granted. Not because love disappeared, Because human psychology normalizes what is constantly available. That is why self-respect must exist alongside kindness. Without it, kindness loses definition. Imagine two men. One is generous but grounded. He helps others willingly, but he can say no without guilt. He listens deeply, but he does not tolerate disrespect. His compassion comes from choice. The other man cannot say no. He apologizes constantly. He avoids all confrontation. He tolerates behavior that quietly destroys him. Both appear kind externally, but internally they are completely different. One is free. The other is afraid. And people can feel the difference instinctively. Even children recognize it. There is a reason certain people naturally command emotional respect without raising their voices. Their energy communicates, "I am kind, but I will not betray myself to keep you comfortable." That creates psychological tension, not toxic tension, respectful tension. The awareness that this person values themselves enough to walk away if necessary. And paradoxically, that often makes people value them more, because boundaries signal self-worth. Meanwhile, excessive niceness often communicates the opposite unintentionally. I will stay no matter how I am treated. Once that message becomes clear, behavior changes. Not always consciously, but predictably. The deeper problem is that many nice people confuse being needed with being loved. Those are not the same thing. Being needed can create temporary importance, but genuine love requires visibility. And people cannot truly love someone who is constantly hiding themselves. If you suppress your anger, hide your needs, erase your preferences, and constantly adapt your personality to avoid rejection, then people are not connecting with you. They are connecting with your performance. That is why so many people feel lonely even inside relationships. Their real self never entered the room. Only their socially acceptable version did. And maintaining that performance becomes exhausting. Every conversation feels calculated. Every disagreement feels threatening. Every emotional expression feels risky. So they continue smiling while internally deteriorating. There is another uncomfortable truth most people avoid discussing. Some people are attracted to excessive niceness precisely because it benefits them. Not everyone wants mutuality. Some people unconsciously search for emotional suppliers, people who will absorb stress without resistance, provide attention without reciprocity, offer loyalty without standards, and excessively nice individuals become perfect targets, especially when they confuse tolerance with love. You see this in friendships where one person always initiates contact, relationships where one partner carries all emotional labor, families where one child becomes the permanent emotional caretaker. These dynamics can continue for years because the nice person fears disruption more than depletion, until eventually something inside collapses, not dramatically, silently. A numbness enters the soul. Conversations feel empty. Giving feels heavy. Compassion starts feeling forced, and then comes guilt. Because nice people often feel guilty for becoming emotionally tired. They think, maybe I'm becoming selfish. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I should just try harder. But exhaustion is not selfishness. It is feedback. The psyche cannot survive endless self-neglect forever. At some point, suppressed truth demands expression. This is why some of the calmest people eventually disappear without explanation. One day, they simply stop answering, stop reaching out, stop trying, and everyone around them is shocked. But internally, the separation happened years earlier. Their body remained present. Their spirit did not. There is a profound difference between kindness and self-erasure. Kindness says, I care about your feelings. Self-erasure says, your feelings matter more than my existence. One creates connection, the other creates imbalance. And imbalance eventually destroys intimacy because resentment poisons silent sacrifice. A relationship cannot remain healthy when one person constantly disappears to maintain harmony. Sooner or later, the hidden anger leaks out through passive aggression, withdrawal, emotional numbness, quiet contempt, or complete emotional collapse. This is why emotionally mature people are not endlessly agreeable. They are honest. Honesty sometimes disappoints people. It sometimes creates friction. It sometimes risks rejection. But honesty preserves identity, and identity is the foundation of psychological stability. Nietzsche warned that individuals who suppress too much of themselves eventually become fragmented internally. They lose coherence. One part of them wants connection, another part wants freedom. One part wants peace. Another part wants revenge for years of emotional suppression. This internal war explains why many nice people feel emotionally confused. They want closeness but resent everyone around them. They want appreciation but fear visibility. They want honesty but panic when conflict appears, because they spent years training themselves to survive through adaptation instead of authenticity. And authenticity feels dangerous after long enough. There is a moment in many men's lives where they finally realize nobody is coming to rescue their identity. Nobody will suddenly notice their silent sacrifices and reward them perfectly. Nobody will magically read the pain hidden beneath their calmness. The world sees what you reveal, and many nice people reveal almost nothing real. Only patience, only understanding, only flexibility, but never standards, never anger, never truth. So people respond accordingly. You cannot expect deep recognition from others while remaining emotionally invisible yourself. This does not mean becoming cold. That is another misunderstanding. The answer to excessive niceness is not cruelty. It is integration. Jung spoke about integrating the shadow. Not eliminating darkness, but acknowledging it consciously. A psychologically mature person is not someone incapable of aggression. It is someone capable of aggression who chooses restraint intentionally. That changes the entire emotional energy of a person. When kindness comes from weakness, it feels fragile. When kindness comes from strength, it feels trustworthy. People sense whether your peace is voluntary or defensive. One commands respect. The other invites unconscious dismissal. This is why some individuals can speak softly and still dominate a room psychologically. Their boundaries exist beneath the surface. You can feel them even before they speak. They are not trying to be liked by everyone. And strangely, that often makes people trust them more. Because authenticity feels rare, especially in a world full of performance. Modern culture quietly rewards emotional masking. Smile more. Be agreeable. Stay positive. Avoid discomfort. But emotional suppression has consequences. Depression often hides inside chronic self-silencing. Anxiety often grows from constant hyper-awareness of other people's reactions. Burnout often emerges from endless emotional accommodation. Many people are not exhausted because life is hard. They are exhausted because they have not been themselves in years. Think about how much energy it takes to constantly monitor your behavior for approval, to rehearse conversations, to avoid offending people, to soften every opinion, to suppress every instinct that might create tension. It becomes psychological imprisonment, and eventually the body feels it. Tight shoulders, mental fatigue, emotional numbness, a strange feeling of disconnection from your own life. The soul knows when it is being abandoned. There is also something deeply tragic about how society often praises self-destructive niceness. People call you mature because you tolerate mistreatment calmly. They call you humble because you never prioritize yourself. They call you selfless because you endlessly sacrifice your needs. But nobody asks whether you are emotionally alive. A person can appear morally admirable while internally disappearing. And disappearing slowly is one of the most painful human experiences because it happens quietly. No visible wound, no obvious disaster. Just a gradual fading of identity. You stop expressing opinions. You stop pursuing desires. You stop confronting disrespect. You stop believing your emotional reality matters, until eventually you become emotionally invisible even to yourself. And this is the hidden danger. When you repeatedly betray your own instincts, your mind stops trusting you. Confidence disappears. Not because you are weak, because self-trust has been broken repeatedly. Every time you silence yourself to avoid rejection, your subconscious notices. Every time you tolerate behavior that violates your dignity, your subconscious notices. Every time you prioritize temporary harmony over truth, your subconscious notices. And eventually something changes internally. You stop feeling solid. That is why boundaries are deeply psychological. They are not just communication tools. They are acts of self-recognition. They tell your mind, my feelings deserve protection too. Without boundaries, self-respect deteriorates slowly, and people can sense that deterioration unconsciously, not because humans are monsters, because emotional energy communicates more than words. Someone who constantly apologizes emits uncertainty. Someone who constantly accommodates emits insecurity. Someone who never disagrees emits fear. Meanwhile, grounded individuals communicate something different. Calm certainty, not arrogance, not hostility, just internal alignment. And alignment creates presence. Presence creates visibility. Visibility creates respect. This is why some quiet people command enormous psychological weight while others disappear entirely. One suppresses themselves, the other inhabits themselves fully. There is a profound loneliness that comes from being emotionally consumed by everyone around you. You become the therapist friend, the emotionally available boyfriend, the stable son, the dependable coworker. Everyone leans on you, but almost nobody truly knows you, because you trained yourself to become emotionally useful instead of emotionally honest. And useful people are often loved conditionally, as long as they continue providing. The moment they stop, the dynamic changes. That realization hurts deeply because it forces a painful question. If I stopped overgiving tomorrow, who would still remain? Many people avoid asking that question because they already fear the answer, so they continue performing emotional labor endlessly, not out of joy, out of survival. But survival is not the same thing as living. A life built entirely around maintaining approval becomes emotionally hollow. You wake up exhausted without understanding why. You feel disconnected during moments that should feel meaningful. You start craving isolation because interaction feels draining. And eventually you realize something terrifying. You spent years building relationships while slowly abandoning yourself inside them. That realization can break a person psychologically or transform them, because once you see the pattern clearly, you cannot unsee it. You begin noticing how often you apologize unnecessarily, how often you smile while uncomfortable, how often you say yes while internally screaming no. And at first, changing feels almost unbearable. Setting boundaries feels cruel. Disappointing people feels dangerous. Speaking honestly feels selfish, because your nervous system associated self-expression with emotional risk for years. But healing requires tolerating that discomfort. There is no path toward self-respect without temporary misunderstanding. Some people will absolutely dislike the new version of you, especially those who benefited from your lack of boundaries. That does not make you bad. It makes the relationship more honest. And honesty reveals dynamics that excessive niceness keeps hidden. Suddenly, people who loved your endless availability become frustrated when you protect your time. People who praised your patience become uncomfortable when you express standards. People who enjoyed your silence become defensive when you finally speak clearly. That moment is psychologically revealing because it exposes who respected your humanity and who only enjoyed your compliance. Many individuals never experience real intimacy because they spend their entire lives shape-shifting for acceptance. They become emotional mirrors instead of human beings. Around confident people, they act agreeable. Around dominant people, they act submissive. Around emotional people, they become caretakers. But somewhere beneath all those adaptations, the real self suffocates quietly. Existential philosophers often emphasized that freedom is terrifying because it requires responsibility for one's authentic existence, and authenticity risks rejection. That is why many people choose emotional invisibility unconsciously, because invisibility feels safer than honest exposure. If nobody sees the real you, nobody can truly reject the real you. But there is a terrible cost to that safety: loneliness. Not ordinary loneliness, existential loneliness, the feeling that nobody truly knows you because you never allowed yourself to be known. And this is where excessive niceness becomes spiritually dangerous. It disconnects you from your own reality. You become so focused on maintaining external harmony that your internal world becomes neglected territory. Your anger goes unheard. Your desires go unexplored. Your intuition goes ignored. Eventually, even your body starts communicating what your mouth refuses to say. Fatigue, anxiety, emotional numbness, irritability. The psyche always seeks balance eventually, even through suffering. There is an image many people carry unconsciously, the image of the good person, always patient, always forgiving, always calm, always accommodating. But real maturity is more complex than that. A mature person knows when to nurture, and when to confront, when to stay, and when to leave, when to empathize, and when to protect themselves. Without that balance, goodness becomes self-destruction. And self-destruction disguised as morality is still self-destruction. One of the most dangerous beliefs a person can internalize is, if I am good enough, people will finally value me. Because it creates endless emotional labor. You keep giving more, understanding more, sacrificing more, trying to earn a form of recognition that healthy relationships give freely. But genuine respect cannot be negotiated through self-erasure. In fact, the more desperately you seek validation through overgiving, the less psychologically substantial you often appear. Because desperation weakens presence. A grounded person gives because they choose to. A desperate person gives because they fear losing connection, and fear changes energy completely. People may not consciously analyze it, but they feel it. This explains why some individuals become strangely magnetic after they stop chasing approval. Not because they became colder, because they became more real. Their words carry more weight. Their attention feels more intentional. Their kindness feels earned instead of automatic. And psychologically, intentionality creates value. Think about how differently people treat someone who can walk away peacefully, not aggressively, not dramatically, just calmly. That ability changes relational dynamics completely because it communicates, my self-respect does not depend on your validation. Few things are more psychologically powerful than that, especially in a world where many people are emotionally dependent on external approval. The irony is that many excessively nice people are actually deeply strong individuals. They can tolerate enormous emotional pain. They can empathize deeply. They can remain patient under pressure. But their strength becomes distorted because it lacks boundaries, like water flooding endlessly without shape. And without shape, strength loses impact. This is why developing boundaries often feels emotionally revolutionary. Not because you become harder, because you become visible. For the first time, people encounter your actual limits, your real preferences, your genuine feelings. And yes, some relationships weaken afterward, but those relationships were often built on imbalance already. Truth does not destroy healthy connection, it reveals unhealthy connection. There is something deeply liberating about realizing you do not need to perform goodness constantly to deserve love. You do not need to earn humanity through exhaustion. You are allowed to disappoint people, allowed to say no, allowed to prioritize your emotional reality. That is not narcissism. It is psychological adulthood. Children survive through adaptation. Adults survive through identity. And identity requires boundaries. Otherwise, you become emotionally absorbent to everyone around you. Their moods shape you. Their expectations control you. Their approval defines you. That is not connection. It is psychological captivity. Some people spend decades trapped there, smiling externally while internally vanishing. Then one day, they wake up in relationships where nobody truly knows them because they spent years presenting only the safest fragments of themselves. No anger, no complexity, no contradiction, no depth, only pleasantness. But human beings are not meant to live as emotionally edited versions of themselves. The shadow always returns eventually, sometimes through burnout, sometimes through depression, sometimes through explosive anger after years of suppression, because whatever remains unexpressed accumulates internally, and accumulated emotion eventually demands release. This is why emotionally integrated people are often calmer than excessively nice people, not because they suppress less emotion, because they express truth earlier. They address disrespect before resentment grows. They communicate needs before emotional exhaustion appears. They leave unhealthy dynamics before psychological damage deepens. That is not cruelty. it is wisdom. There is a quiet confidence that emerges when you stop abandoning yourself for acceptance. You stop over-explaining, stop chasing, stop forcing emotional reciprocity. You become more selective with your energy. And, strangely, life becomes more peaceful afterward. Not because conflict disappears, because inner conflict decreases. You are no longer constantly betraying yourself to maintain external harmony. That internal alignment changes everything. Your voice sounds different. Your posture changes. Your eye contact becomes steadier. Not because you learned manipulation tactics, because self-respect affects presence physically. The body reflects psychological truth constantly. A man who trusts himself moves differently than a man who constantly seeks approval. One inhabits space naturally. The other asks permission emotionally before existing, and people respond accordingly. There is another painful reality many nice people eventually confront. Some relationships survive only because one person suppresses themselves continuously. The moment authenticity enters, tension appears. And while that can feel tragic, it is also clarifying, because connection built upon self-erasure is never truly secure. It only appears stable because one person absorbs all emotional discomfort silently. Real intimacy requires truth, not endless accommodation. Truth allows two real people to exist simultaneously. Accommodation often allows only one. That is why excessive niceness eventually becomes unsustainable psychologically. No human being can permanently abandon themselves without consequence. The soul rebels eventually, sometimes quietly, sometimes violently, but always eventually. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson hidden beneath invisibility. People do not become invisible because they are too kind. They become invisible because they disappear themselves. They suppress their edges, hide their truth, deny their anger, minimize their needs, until nothing distinct remains, only emotional service. But human beings are not remembered deeply for how much they tolerated. They are remembered for the reality of their presence, for the honesty in their voice, the conviction in their boundaries, the calmness of their self-respect. True kindness is not weak. True kindness has structure. It knows when to give and when to withdraw, when to nurture and when to protect, when to forgive and when to walk away. Without that balance, kindness becomes self-neglect wearing moral language, and self-neglect eventually destroys the spirit. The world does not need more emotionally erased people pretending to be endlessly okay. It needs more integrated human beings, people capable of compassion without self-betrayal, people capable of empathy without emotional slavery, people capable of love without disappearing inside it. Because the strongest individuals are not those who dominate others. They are those who remain connected to themselves while facing the pressure of the world. And that is rare, very rare. Especially now, most people are terrified of rejection, terrified of conflict, terrified of disapproval. So they fragment themselves socially. One personality for work, one for relationships, one for strangers, one hidden version nobody sees. But inner fragmentation creates suffering. There is enormous peace in becoming psychologically whole, in saying, "This is who I am. These are my boundaries. This is what I feel." Without apology, not aggressively, not arrogantly, honestly, because honesty creates solidity, and solidity creates visibility. A person grounded in themselves becomes unforgettable quietly, not because they demand attention, because their presence feels real. In a world addicted to performance, reality has weight. Maybe that is why certain people stay in your memory forever, not because they were endlessly nice, but because they felt deeply authentic. They had warmth without weakness, kindness without self-erasure, calmness without submission. You could feel their humanity clearly. And they allowed you to feel yours too. That is the difference. Excessive niceness often hides the self. Real kindness reveals it. So if you have spent years trying to earn love through endless accommodation, through silence, through emotional exhaustion, understand this carefully. You were never meant to disappear to deserve connection. You were never meant to become emotionally invisible to keep others comfortable. And perhaps the most important transformation in adulthood is realizing that protecting your spirit is not selfish. It is necessary. Because once a person loses contact with themselves completely, they can no longer offer genuine love anyway. Only performance, only obligation, only survival, and survival is a very lonely way to live. At some point, every person must decide, will I continue shaping myself around other people's comfort, or will I finally become someone real? That choice changes everything, because the moment you stop abandoning yourself, something unexpected happens. You become visible again, not only to others, but to yourself. And that may be the most important form of recognition a human being can ever experience.